Ladies and gentlemen, if you enjoy my video, please click the like button and share the video. It is the only way the YouTube algorithms really notices me. I will be very grateful to you. The Night's Cruel Secrets. Scary story published by Scare Fiction. Read for you by Scare Fiction. Chapter 1. The Arrival. Emily Parker gripped the steering wheel as her car crept along the winding, fog-choked road. The sun had long since dipped behind the jagged peaks of the Appalachian Mountains, casting the world in shadows. The GPS flickered on her dashboard, the screen struggling to maintain its grip on the signal. "Welcome to Raven's Hollow." The sign finally appeared out of the mist, its letters faded and cracked, much like the town itself, she imagined. She felt a shiver skitter down her spine as she drove into the town. It was smaller than she had anticipated, a collection of worn buildings huddled together as if bracing against some unseen force. The streets were eerily quiet, not a soul in sight, though she could feel eyes on her watching, waiting. Emily pulled up in front of the Nightshade Lodge, the only inn in town. It stood as a relic from another era, its paint peeling, shutters hanging askew. A weathered sign creaked in the breeze, adding to the unsettling atmosphere. She grabbed her bag, the weight of her camera equipment reassuring in its solidity, and headed inside. The lobby was dimly lit, the only source of light, a flickering bulb that cast long shadows across the room. Behind the desk stood Mrs. Hargrove, a thin, older woman with hollow cheeks and eyes that seemed to pierce right through Emily. Her smile was tight, not reaching those cold eyes. "You're here for the story, aren't you?" Mrs. Hargrove's voice was raspy, as though it hadn't been used in years. Emily nodded, trying to shake off the unease that clung to her. "I'm investigating the disappearances. I heard Raven's Hollow has had more than its share." Mrs. Hargrove's smile faltered. "You'd do well to leave this place, Miss Parker. Some stories are better left untold." The words hung heavy in the air, a warning that sent a chill down Emily's spine. But she was here for a reason, and she wasn't about to let the fears of a small-town innkeeper deter her. "I'll be careful," she assured. That night, as Emily settled into her room, the unease only grew. The room was cold, the old radiator barely doing its job. The wind outside howled through the trees, and just as she was beginning to drift off, she heard it, a soft, rhythmic creaking, as if someone or something was walking through the forest. She shot up in bed, heart pounding, and glanced out the window. For a moment, she saw nothing but the dense wall of trees. Then, a shadow moved, just at the edge of her vision, too tall to be an animal. She stared, frozen, but the shadow was gone as quickly as it appeared, swallowed by the night. Emily pulled the curtains shut, her breath shaky. Raven's Hollow was hiding something. And whatever it was, she had a feeling it wasn't going to let her leave easily. Chapter 2. The Unseen Shadows. Emily barely slept that night, haunted by the image of the shadowy figure in the forest. As dawn broke, she forced herself out of bed, her mind whirling with questions. The chill of the night clung to her as she dressed. The air inside the Nightshade Lodge still heavy with the unease that had settled in her bones. She had come to Raven's Hollow for a story, but now it felt like the story had come to her. Determined to get answers, Emily stepped into the town's only cafe, a small, worn-out place that looked like it had seen better days. The scent of stale coffee hung in the air, and the patrons few and far between huddled over their cups, speaking in hushed tones. As she approached the counter, the conversation ceased, replaced by the uncomfortable silence of people who knew more than they were willing to share. Emily ordered a coffee, scanning the room as she waited. An elderly man sitting in the corner caught her eye. His gnarled hands trembled as he lifted his cup, and his gaze was fixed on her, a mix of pity and fear in his watery eyes. She took her coffee and walked over to him, offering a polite smile. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, though she didn't wait for a reply before sliding into the chair opposite him. He glanced around nervously before nodding. "You're the one asking about the disappearances," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. Emily leaned in, her heart quickening. "Yes, I am. Can you tell me anything?" He hesitated, then leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "The night's cruel secrets," he muttered, the words barely audible. "Best you leave them be." A chill ran down her spine at the phrase, but before she could press him for more, the caf door swung open with a jingle, and Sheriff Dalton walked in. The elderly man immediately clammed up, his eyes darting to the sheriff as if he'd seen a ghost. Sheriff Dalton was a tall, broad-shouldered man, his once black hair now streaked with gray. His eyes, however, were what struck Emily the most. They were dark and tired, the eyes of someone who had seen too much. He nodded curtly at her as he approached the counter, ordering his coffee with the efficiency of someone who had done this every day for years. Emily didn't wait for an invitation. "Sheriff Dalton," she called, rising from her seat and crossing the room. "I'm Emily Parker. I'm investigating the disappearances here in Raven's Hollow." The sheriff turned to her, his expression guarded. "You should be careful what you dig up around here, Mrs. Parker," he said, his tone flat. "Some things are better left buried." "Like the night's cruel secrets?" She pressed, watching for any sign of recognition. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, Emily thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, a deep, weary sound. "The blood moon," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "That's when it all happens. Always on the blood moon." The words sent a fresh wave of unease through Emily. "What happens on the blood moon?" But the sheriff shook his head. "I've said too much already. If you're smart, you'll leave before the next one." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Emily standing in the caf, her coffee forgotten. The blood moon. The night's cruel secrets. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was one she wasn't sure she wanted to see. Determined to uncover the truth, Emily spent the afternoon in the town's old library. Dust clung to every surface, and the scent of mildew hung in the air as she combed through the shelves, searching for anything that could shed light on Raven's Hollow's dark past. In the far corner, tucked away behind a stack of forgotten books, she found it a dusty, leather-bound journal. The pages were brittle and yellowed with age, filled with cryptic entries and sketches that sent a chill through her. The journal spoke of dark rituals, of pacts made with ancient forces, and of blood sacrifices under the blood moon. Emily's hands trembled as she read, each word drawing her deeper into the town's shadowy history. The night's cruel secrets were darker than she had ever imagined, and she was only just beginning to uncover them. Chapter 3. The Blood Moon. Emily couldn't shake the unease that clung to her as she left the library, the journal tucked securely in her bag. Town seemed even quieter than before, as if the very air was holding its breath. As she walked back to the Nightshade Lodge, she noticed the change in the townsfolk. They moved quickly, heads down, avoiding eye contact, their faces etched with anxiety. It was as if the entire town was gripped by a shared dread, something deeper than she'd imagined. That evening, as she prepared for bed, a sharp knock on her door made her jump. Emily hesitated before opening it, but there was no one there, just an envelope on the floor, the paper old and yellowed. She picked it up, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. "Leave before the blood moon rises. This town is cursed. You've been warned." The words were scrawled in a hurried, almost desperate script. Emily's heart pounded as she read the note over and over. Someone knew what was coming, and they were afraid for her. But she was determined to see this through. She wasn't going to run from the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. The next morning, the sky was a bruised purple, heavy clouds hanging low over the mountains. Emily decided to explore the outskirts of Raven's Hollow, hoping to find more clues about the town's dark history. The air grew colder as she ventured further from the center of town, the forest thickening around her like a living thing. The trees were twisted, their branches clawing at the sky, and the silence was oppressive. She stumbled upon an old abandoned church, its walls cracked and covered in ivy. The door creaked open with a haunting groan as she pushed it, revealing an interior that seemed frozen in time. Pews were covered in dust, and strange symbols were carved into the walls, symbols that matched those in the journal. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized this place had once been used for something far darker than worship. As night fell, Emily returned to the Nightshade Lodge, her mind spinning with what she had discovered. The blood moon was just hours away, and the tension in the air was palpable. The sky outside her window began to shift, the moon rising like a crimson eye, bathing the town in an eerie red glow. Emily felt an unnatural heaviness settle over her as she lay in bed, trying to make sense of the day's events. But sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was filled with nightmares, visions of shadowy figures chanting in the forest, of blood spilling on ancient stones, and of the Watcher, a monstrous presence lurking just beyond her sight. She awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, the room eerily quiet. The journal was open beside her, though she was certain she had closed it before bed. A page she hadn't seen before stared up at her, the ink dark and foreboding. When the blood moon rises, the Watcher will claim what is his. The night's cruel secrets must be kept, or all shall be lost. Emily's breath caught as she read the chilling prophecy. The blood moon had risen, and with it, the terror she had only begun to uncover. Raven's Hollow was a town on the edge, teetering between the living and the dead, and she was caught in the middle of it all. Chapter 4. The First Revelation. Emily sat at the edge of her bed, the journal still open to the ominous prophecy. The blood moon cast its eerie glow through the thin curtains, making the room feel smaller, as if the walls were closing in. She couldn't ignore the growing fear gnawing at her, but she knew she needed answers. And there was only one person in town who might give them to her: Sheriff Dalton. Determined, she threw on her jacket and marched out into the night, the cold air biting at her skin. The streets were deserted, the townsfolk wisely locked away, hiding from whatever horror the blood moon might bring. As she approached the sheriff's office, Emily felt a sense of urgency pulsing through her, the stakes higher than ever before. Sheriff Dalton was at his desk, the room dimly lit by a single lamp. He looked up as she entered, his expression unreadable. Before he could speak, Emily slammed the journal down in front of him, the old pages rustling like whispers of the past. "You knew," she said, her voice low but fierce. "You knew all along what was happening in this town. And you let me walk into it blind." Dalton sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "It's not that simple, Miss Parker. Raven's Hollow is cursed, always has been." Emily's heart raced as she leaned in closer. "Tell me everything." The sheriff hesitated, his eyes darkening with the weight of what he was about to reveal. "This town was built on blood," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "The original settlers made a pact with something they didn't understand: the Watcher. They believed it would protect them, but there was a price. Blood sacrifices offered up on the night of the blood moon." Emily felt a chill crawl down her spine. "And the disappearances?" "Part of the curse," Dalton replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Watcher demands payment. If it doesn't get what it wants, it takes what it's owed." Emily's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. But why me? Why am I caught up in this? The sheriff looked at her, his gaze filled with a mixture of pity and something else, fear. You're not here by accident, Miss Parker. Your family was among the original settlers. You're connected to this place, to its dark history. The Watcher knows that. Emily's stomach turned. She had come to Raven's Hollow for a story, but now she was part of it, tied to the town's sinister past in ways she couldn't have imagined. That night, sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it was filled with nightmares. In her dreams, she was running through the forest, branches tearing at her clothes, the ground beneath her feet shifting like quicksand. Unseen forces chased her, their whispers echoing in her ears. The night's cruel secrets must be kept. She woke up drenched in sweat, her heart pounding in her chest. But the terror didn't end with her waking. As she rose from bed, something caught her eye, a faint line in the wall near the corner of the room. Emily moved closer, her pulse quickening as she traced her fingers along the edge. It was a hidden door, expertly concealed. With trembling hands, she pushed it open. The room inside was small and musty, filled with artifacts from a time long past. Old books, strange carvings, and a map spread out on a dusty table. The map marked a location deep in the forest, where the rituals had taken place. Emily stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. The final piece of the puzzle lay before her, but the path it led to was one of unimaginable darkness. The night's cruel secrets were unraveling, and she was about to step into the heart of them. Chapter 5. The Descent. Emily couldn't tear her eyes away from the map. The ink was faded, the paper brittle with age, but the location it marked was clear, a spot deep within the forest, far from any trails. The site of the ancient rituals. Her pulse quickened with both fear and determination. Whatever had happened there, it was the key to Raven's Hollow's dark secrets, and she had to see it for herself. The following morning, she packed her bag with essentials, flashlight, camera, and the journal, and set out for the forest. The townsfolk were nowhere to be seen, the streets eerily quiet, as if the entire town was holding its breath. The sun struggled to break through the thick canopy as she ventured deeper into the woods, the air growing colder with each step. The forest felt alive, but not in the way a forest should. Trees seemed to close in around her, their twisted branches forming unnatural shapes that cast haunting shadows on the ground. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of dead leaves beneath her boots and the occasional rustle of something unseen moving just beyond her vision. She followed the map's directions, her heart pounding in her chest as the path led her further from the safety of the town. Finally, she arrived at the site. A stone circle stood in the middle of a small clearing, the remnants of the ancient rituals. The stones were weathered and covered in strange carvings, symbols that matched those in the journal. The air here was thick, almost suffocating, and a sense of malevolence hung over the clearing like a dark cloud. Emily could feel it pressing down on her, an overwhelming sense of dread that made her want to turn and run. But she forced herself to stay. She walked around the circle, taking photos and examining the carvings. As she did, the air grew colder, and she began to feel an eerie presence. It started subtly whispers on the wind, indistinct and distant. But soon, the whispers grew louder, and she could almost make out words, though they were spoken in a language she didn't understand. Emily's breath quickened as she noticed movement from the corner of her eye. She spun around, but there was nothing there. Still, the feeling of being watched was undeniable. She glanced back at the stone circle, and for a split second, she thought she saw figures standing among the stones, pale, ghostly forms with hollow eyes staring right at her. She blinked, and they were gone, but the sense of dread remained. As she delved deeper into the investigation, the phenomena intensified. Back at the inn, objects in her room moved on their own, a chair scraping across the floor, her notebook sliding off the table as if pushed by unseen hands. The whispers followed her everywhere, growing louder in the dead of night, and the fleeting visions of the sacrificed spirits left her questioning her sanity. Sleep became impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the stone circle, the ghostly figures, and the malevolent presence that seemed to lurk just out of sight. Was it all in her head, or was the town's dark history reaching out to claim her? Driven to the brink, Emily turned to the journal for answers, hoping it might hold the key to breaking the curse. That's when she found it, a passage she had overlooked before. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. The Parker family, bound by blood to the Watcher, shall carry the curse through the generations. Their fate sealed by the pact made on the night of the first blood moon. Her breath caught in her throat. The truth hit her like a cold wave. She wasn't just investigating the town's dark past, she was a part of it. The curse wasn't just a story, it was her inheritance, passed down through her family, linking her to the horrors of Raven's Hollow in ways she had never imagined. And now, the spirits of the sacrificed knew she was here. They had been waiting for her return. Chapter 6: The Unraveling. Emily's hands trembled as she clutched the journal, the weight of her cursed heritage pressing down on her. She had uncovered the horrifying truth, but it only led to more questions. Mrs. Hargrove, the innkeeper who had been so cryptic from the start, must know more. Emily needed answers now. Storming down the creaking stairs of the Nightshade Lodge, Emily found Mrs. Hargrove in the dimly lit parlor, sitting by the fire as if expecting her. The old woman's eyes were sharp, cutting through the shadows, filled with a mix of pity and something darker. "You've learned the truth," Mrs. Hargrove said before Emily could speak. Her voice was calm, resigned. "I had hoped it wouldn't come to this." "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily demanded, her voice breaking with fear and frustration. "You knew all along. You knew what I was walking into." Mrs. Hargrove sighed deeply, setting down her knitting. "Because, child, I was trying to protect you. Your bloodline is the key to this town's curse, but it's also the key to breaking it or to succumbing to it completely." Emily's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "The curse can only be ended with a final ritual, one that must be completed during the next blood moon," Mrs. Hargrove explained. "The Watcher demands a sacrifice, and that sacrifice is you, Emily." The words struck Emily like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. Sacrifice. The word echoed in her mind, a death sentence handed down from generations past. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "I'm not going to be some offering for a damned spirit." "Leaving won't be easy," Mrs. Hargrove warned. "The town won't let you go. It's too late now." Ignoring the warning, Emily bolted from the inn, determined to escape Raven's Hollow and the nightmare that had ensnared her. She drove down the winding mountain roads, her knuckles white as she gripped the steering wheel. But no matter which way she turned, the roads twisted back on themselves, leading her in circles. The landscape blurred, the trees closing in, their branches stretching toward her like skeletal fingers. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the hallucinations began. Shadows moved in the corners of her vision, whispers slithered through the air, and the Watcher's presence grew stronger, an oppressive weight on her chest. Emily's mind raced, teetering on the edge of madness. Was the town warping reality around her, or was she losing her grip on sanity? In her desperation, she pulled over to the side of the road, her breath ragged as she tried to regain control. But the danger was far from over. As she stepped out of the car, she heard voices, angry, frightened voices growing louder in the distance. The townsfolk had found her, their faces twisted with fear and desperation. They believed that sacrificing her would save them, that her death could end the curse. Panicked, Emily turned and ran into the forest, the angry mob close behind. Branches clawed at her as she plunged deeper into the woods, her lungs burning with every breath. The night was thick with fog, the air heavy with the Watcher's malevolent presence. The forest was a labyrinth, every turn leading her further from escape and closer to the heart of the curse. Emily could feel the Watcher closing in, its dark power pulsing through the ground beneath her feet. She was no longer sure if she was running from the townsfolk or from the ancient spirit itself. The terror was overwhelming, suffocating, and the line between reality and nightmare blurred beyond recognition. Finally, she stumbled, collapsing to the ground, her energy spent. The forest around her was silent, the only sound her ragged breathing. But she knew she wasn't alone. The Watcher was near, and its presence was stronger than ever. The ritual was coming, and Emily was the center of it all, whether she could escape or not. Chapter 7. The Gathering Storm. Emily staggered through the dense forest, her legs trembling from exhaustion, her mind a whirlwind of fear and desperation. The Watcher's presence clung to her like a shadow, a constant reminder that time was running out. Her only hope lay in the old church she had discovered days earlier, its eerie symbols and cryptic carvings suddenly taking on a new significance. She had to get there. She had to find a way to end this nightmare. The church loomed ahead, its crumbling stone walls barely visible in the thick fog. Emily pushed open the heavy wooden door, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped inside. The air was cold, damp, and smelled of decay. But it was a refuge, a place where she could think, where the townsfolk wouldn't find her. For now, at least. She lit a candle, its weak flame flickering as she moved through the nave, searching for anything that could help her. Her eyes fell on a worn altar, the stone surface covered in dust and cobwebs. Beneath it, hidden away, she found what she was looking for: ancient texts, bound in leather and filled with faded ink. She flipped through the pages, her breath catching as she discovered details of a counter-ritual that could break the curse. It was dangerous, complex, but it was her only chance. As she read, the spirits of the sacrificed began to appear, their ghostly forms shimmering in the dim light. They surrounded her, their eyes filled with sorrow and pain. "Free us," they whispered, their voices echoing in the cold air. "But beware, if you fail, our suffering will be eternal, and the curse will only grow stronger." Emily's heart pounded. The weight of their pleas bore down on her, but so did the fear of what might happen if she couldn't succeed. The blood moon was almost upon them, and the ritual was already in motion. She had to act quickly. The night of the final blood moon arrived, the sky glowing a deep, unnatural red. Emily could feel the tension in the air as she hurried through the woods, gathering the ingredients for the counter-ritual herbs, symbols, and the journal, which held the key to unlocking the ancient spell. But as she raced against time, the townsfolk, driven by terror and desperation, were preparing for their own ritual, convinced that sacrificing her was the only way to save themselves. Sheriff Dalton led them, his face grim, eyes hollow. He believed he was doing what needed to be done, but Emily knew he was wrong. If they completed the ritual, the Watcher's power would only grow, and the town would be doomed forever. She was almost ready, the final piece of the counter-ritual in hand, when she heard them coming. Their voices were low, urgent, the crunch of their footsteps growing louder as they closed in on her. Emily's heart raced, panic surging through her veins. She tried to flee, but it was too late. Townsfolk surrounded her, their faces twisted with fear and superstition, their hands rough as they grabbed her and dragged her toward the stone circle. The Watcher's presence grew stronger with each step, its malevolent energy thrumming in the air. Emily struggled, but the townsfolk held fast, their minds set on one goal, completing the ritual and offering her up as a sacrifice. They reached the stone circle, the ancient site where so much blood had already been spilled. The ground was cold beneath Emily's feet as they pushed her into the center, the Watcher's power pulsing through the stones. Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, his hand trembling as he raised a ceremonial knife, his eyes locked on hers. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, the counter-ritual words burning in her mind. She knew what she had to do, but time was running out. The blood moon hung high above them, a crimson eye watching, waiting. The final confrontation was at hand. Chapter 8. The night's cruel secrets revealed. The night air was thick with tension as Emily lay bound to the cold stone altar, her wrists and ankles tied with rough ropes that bit into her skin. Above her, the blood moon blazed in the sky, casting an eerie red light over the stone circle and the chanting townsfolk. Their voices rose and fell in an ancient, forgotten language, each word dripping with fear and desperation. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a vice. She had one chance, one fleeting opportunity to save herself and the town from the horror that was about to be unleashed. The ground trembled as the Watcher began to manifest. It emerged from the shadows, a terrifying entity of swirling darkness and whispers, its form shifting and impossible to grasp. Eyes flickered within the shadows, cold and malevolent, locking onto Emily as if seeing straight into her soul. The Watcher's presence was suffocating, its power overwhelming, and the air grew colder with each passing second. "Bring the sacrifice," it demanded, its voice a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Townsfolk hesitated, their faces pale and fearful, but Sheriff Dalton stepped forward, knife in hand, his eyes empty of everything except the conviction that this was the only way to save Raven's Hollow. Emily's mind raced, the counter-ritual words echoing in her memory. She had to act now, or it would be too late. Summoning every ounce of strength, she twisted against the ropes, the rough fibers tearing at her skin. The knots loosened just enough, and with a final desperate effort, she broke free, rolling off the altar and onto the ground as the chanting faltered. Sheriff Dalton lunged at her, but Emily was faster, grabbing the journal from where it had fallen beside the altar. She began to recite the words of the counter-ritual, her voice shaking but growing stronger with each verse. The spirits of the sacrificed began to stir, their ghostly forms rising from the earth, their eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. They surrounded the Watcher, their ethereal bodies shimmering in the blood-red light. The Watcher roared, its shadows lashing out at the spirits, but they held firm, their presence weakening the entity's grip on the town. Emily continued the counter-ritual, her voice now a powerful command, calling on the spirits to aid her in banishing the darkness once and for all. But as the final words left her lips, a choice loomed before her, a choice that would seal the fate of Raven's Hollow and her own soul. Counter-ritual could destroy the Watcher, but it would also doom the spirits to eternal unrest, trapping them forever in the liminal space between life and death. Alternatively, she could sacrifice herself, her blood breaking the curse and freeing the spirits, but allowing the Watcher's malevolent influence to spread beyond Raven's Hollow, dooming others to the same fate. Emily hesitated, the weight of the decision crushing her. The Watcher's growls turned to desperate howls as the spirits pressed in, their faces pleading with Emily to end their suffering. She looked at the faces of the townsfolk, their fear palpable, their lives hanging in the balance. And then, with a deep breath, she made her choice. She raised the knife she had taken from Sheriff Dalton and slashed her palm, letting her blood drip onto the altar. The Watcher screeched in fury as the spirits, now freed, swarmed the entity, their collective power overwhelming it. The shadows writhed and twisted, the Watcher's form unraveling as it was pulled into the earth, banished back to the darkness from which it came. As the last echoes of the Watcher's screams faded into the night, the blood moon began to wane, its crimson light dimming until only the pale light of the regular moon remained. Emily collapsed to the ground, her body weak but her soul at peace. The spirits, now free, began to dissipate, their expressions of gratitude the last things she saw before they faded into the night. The curse was broken, but Emily knew the town would never be the same. Neither would she. As dawn broke over the horizon, she lay there, staring up at the sky, knowing that while she had saved Raven's Hollow, the cost had been great. And the night's cruel secrets, once buried in darkness, would now live on in her memories forever.